The night I realized how much I trusted my wife, Lauren was standing barefoot in our kitchen, drinking red wine out of a coffee mug because she said real glasses made ordinary Tuesdays feel too serious. She was still in a cream blouse from a client meeting, sleeves rolled to her elbows, lipstick half faded, smiling like she had just gotten away with something harmless. That was Lauren. She moved through life like rules were suggestions, and somehow people loved her more for it. I used to think that was why we worked. I'm Evan Parker. I'm an insurance consultant in Chicago, which means my days are built on caution, details, and reading what people miss. I make a good living because I know how to measure risk before it becomes damage. At work, that instinct made me valuable. At home, with Lauren, I let it go. I told myself marriage wasn't supposed to feel like an investigation. For 9 years, I believed ours was solid. We lived in a brick townhouse on the north side with tall windows that caught the late afternoon sun and turned the dining room gold. On fall mornings, she filled the place with the smell of cinnamon coffee before I left for the office. On winter nights, I came home to music playing through the first floor, her heels kicked off by the stairs, design samples spread across the table, like she owned not just the room, but the air in it. She had built her luxury design business from almost nothing, and I admired the force of her. Lauren didn't enter a space quietly. She arrived. Next to her, I looked even calmer than I was. She used to joke that if the building caught fire, I'd probably stop to straighten a picture frame on the way out. I'd tell her somebody had to be responsible. Then she'd grin, step into my space, and say, "That's why you married me. I make you interesting." Maybe she did. Our friends said we balanced each other perfectly. Lauren was bold where I was deliberate. She said what she thought. I thought before I said anything. She liked crowded restaurants, spontaneous weekends, expensive candles, loud laughter. I liked routine, pressed shirts, dinner reservations made 2 weeks early. It never felt like friction. It felt like structure. Like each of us gave the other something we couldn't create alone. And for a long time, I believed that was enough. If there were cracks back then, I didn't call them that. I called them personality. I called them stress. I called them marriage. Mostly, I called them nothing at all. In the beginning, Lauren's mischief felt like weather. Sudden, bright, impossible to take personally. She once switched the framed photo on my desk with an old college picture where I had braces and a haircut that made me look 12. I didn't notice until a senior partner stopped mid-sentence, picked it up, and asked, "Parker, was this your witness protection phase?" Lauren laughed so hard when I told her that she had to lean against the counter to breathe. I laughed too. It seemed easier that way. That was the thing about her jokes. They always arrived wrapped in charm. She liked surprise dinners, fake stories with ridiculous endings, harmless little setups that made people gasp for half a second before laughing. At first, I even admired the confidence behind it. Lauren could control a room with timing alone. She knew exactly when to pause, when to smile, when to tilt her head just enough to make people lean in. But somewhere along the way, the target shifted. It happened so gradually, I could not point to a single day and say, "There, that's where it changed." At a dinner with friends in River North, she told the table I still color-coded my sock drawer. That part was true. Then she added, "He also has a spreadsheet for our grocery budget, which is deeply romantic if you're attracted to accountants and serial killers." Everyone laughed. I smiled because everyone else was smiling, but I remember the heat climbing up my neck. I'm not an accountant, and I never made a spreadsheet for romance. It was for efficiency. A small thing. Not worth correcting. A week later, during drinks with 2 of her clients, she told a story about how I needed 15 minutes to choose a paint shade for the guest room because I was emotionally overwhelmed by beige. That never happened. What happened was I said all 4 samples looked the same to me, and she turned that into a performance. Her clients laughed like they'd been given premium seats. "Tell them the rest," she said, touching my arm. "There isn't a rest," I told her. She smiled at me for a second too long. "See? That's him. Always serious." People said it like it was lovable, reliable, classic Evan. But I started noticing how often I was being translated into something smaller in her stories. Less husband than character. Less partner than punchline. Even when we were alone, She kept testing that edge. If I forgot where she left her keys, she'd sigh and say, "You'd never survive without me." If I missed the point of one of her stories because I'd had a long day, she'd narrow her eyes and murmur, "You really do live in your own little climate-controlled world." Then she'd kiss my cheek like that erased it. I told myself she didn't mean harm. I told myself marriage had seasons, tones, rough patches disguised as banter. But the laughter around her jokes was getting louder, and my own was starting to sound delayed, like it belonged to someone else. By the time I started noticing the silence, our lives looked better than they ever had. My client list had doubled in less than 2 years. I was closing contracts with companies that used to ignore my emails. My calendar stayed full weeks in advance, and my phone rarely stopped vibrating. People trusted me with decisions that involved real money, real risk. I had built that carefully, step by step. Lauren's world had expanded even faster. Her design firm moved out of the small studio she once worked from and into a polished office downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows and a waiting area that smelled like expensive cedar and something citrus I couldn't name. She started landing high-end clients, developers, boutique hotels, people who spoke in numbers I didn't ask about. Her Instagram turned into a portfolio of spaces that didn't look real. Clean lines, perfect lighting, controlled chaos. From the outside, we looked like momentum. Inside, we stopped intersecting. Our mornings became logistical. I left early, usually before she was fully awake. Coffee brewed, keys on the counter, a quiet "see you tonight" if she stirred. She stayed up late, often coming home after I had already gone to bed. Sometimes I'd wake up briefly when I heard the front door click open, her heels soft against the hardwood, the faint glow of her phone lighting the hallway. We started missing each other in small, consistent ways. Dinner turned into separate events. I ate at the office more often than I admitted. She ordered in or went out with clients, partners, people I only heard about in passing. When we did sit at the same table, there was always something else between us, her phone buzzing, my mind still on a case, both of us half present. "You're quiet," she said one night, pushing her plate away after barely eating. "Long day," I answered. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on me a second longer than usual, like she was waiting for something else. I didn't give it to her, not because I was hiding anything. I just didn't know what she expected. That became the pattern. She started filling the silence in other ways. More events, more social nights, more stories about people I hadn't met. Her energy didn't slow down, it redirected. If anything, she seemed sharper, more restless, like she was constantly searching for something just out of reach. One evening, I came home earlier than expected. The house was dark except for the kitchen. She was standing at the counter, scrolling through her phone, a half-finished glass of wine next to her. "You're early," she said, not looking up. "Meeting got canceled." She hummed, still scrolling. I watched her for a moment longer than I normally would. There was nothing obviously wrong. Same posture, same calm, but something felt distant. Not cold, not angry, just not there. "Everything okay?" I asked. She finally looked at me, smiled quickly. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" I nodded. That should have been enough. But as I walked upstairs, I realized I couldn't remember the last time she had asked me how my day actually went, and waited for the answer. I told myself it was just timing. 2 careers accelerating at once. Temporary misalignment. But for the first time, the thought crossed my mind, quiet and unwelcome. Maybe we weren't balancing each other anymore. Maybe we were just moving in parallel. The first time something felt undeniably wrong, it didn't happen at home. It happened under warm gallery lights, surrounded by strangers holding champagne they barely drank. The event was a downtown charity auction. Art, donors, quiet bidding wars disguised as polite conversation. Lauren had been invited weeks earlier through one of her clients, and she insisted we go together. She even picked my tie that night, a dark navy one she said made me look less like a negotiation. "Invite Nate," she added casually, while adjusting her earrings in the mirror. I looked up. "Nate, your old friend. You said he's back in the city." That caught my attention. Lauren didn't usually take interest in my friendships unless they intersected with her world somehow. He just moved back, I said. We haven't really. Perfect. She cut in, smiling at my reflection. He shouldn't be alone at something like this. There was something in her tone. Not pushy. Just deliberate. So I texted him. Nate showed up exactly on time. Same easy posture, same half-smile, though there was something worn around the edges I didn't remember. His last relationship had ended badly, I knew that much, but we hadn't had the chance to catch up properly yet. Good to see you, man, he said, gripping my shoulder. You too. Lauren stepped in before I could say more. Nate, she said, like she had known him longer than 5 seconds. I've heard a lot about you. He smiled, polite. Hopefully not all of it's bad. Oh, she said lightly. Only the interesting parts. I noticed the way she held eye contact a second longer than necessary. Not inappropriate. Not obvious. Just intentional. At first, I ignored it. The room filled quickly. Soft music, low voices, the occasional clink of glass. I moved between conversations, speaking with potential clients, maintaining the version of myself people expected, measured, attentive, controlled. But every time I looked across the room, I saw them. Lauren and Nate. Not standing too close. Not touching. Nothing you could point at and call wrong. But she kept orbiting back to him, laughing at things I couldn't hear, tilting her head in that way she used when she was fully engaged. At one point, I joined them mid-conversation. And then I just left, Nate was saying. Lauren laughed, soft but sharp. That's exactly what I would have done. You don't even know the whole story, he said. I don't need to, she replied. Some situations just feel obvious. Her eyes flicked to me for half a second, then back to him. What do you think, Evan? She asked. It was a simple question, but I realized I had no idea what they were talking about. I think, I said carefully, context usually matters. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Of course you do. They turned back to each other. I stayed for another minute, then excused myself. I told myself I was imagining it, that this was what social events looked like. People talking, laughing, moving between conversations. But as the night went on, the pattern didn't break. It repeated. And somewhere between the third and fourth time I caught her watching Nate when he wasn't looking, something settled in my chest. Not panic, not anger, just a quiet, precise shift. The kind I recognized from work. The moment when something stops being coincidence and starts becoming a pattern. A few weeks later, I understood that what I felt at the auction wasn't imagination. It was a warning. The rooftop party was for one of my bigger clients. Late evening, clean skyline view, quiet music just loud enough to fill the gaps. The kind of event where every conversation mattered. I wore a charcoal suit, the same one I used when I needed people to take me seriously without trying too hard. Lauren looked like she belonged above the city. Black dress, simple, precise. No excess. She moved through the crowd like she owned the night, greeting people I didn't know, remembering names I forgot seconds after hearing them. I was mid-conversation with a potential partner when she touched my arm. Evan, she said softly, smiling at the man I was speaking with. Can I borrow you for a second? Her tone was light, but there was no space to refuse without making it awkward. Of course, I said, excusing myself. She guided me away from the conversation, her hand still lightly on my sleeve. Not rushed, not urgent, just controlled. There's someone I want you to meet, she said. We stopped near the edge of the terrace where a man stood alone, holding a drink he hadn't touched. Early 30s, relaxed posture, sharp eyes. He looked like he was waiting for something. Evan, this is Cole, Lauren said. I nodded. Nice to meet you. Cole gave a small smile. You too. There was a pause. Not long, but long enough. Lauren stepped slightly closer to me. I could feel the shift before she spoke. I think it's time I tell you something, she said. Her voice changed. Still calm, but stripped of the usual playfulness. I turned to her fully. What is it? She didn't hesitate. I've been seeing someone, she said. The words landed clean. No build-up. No softness. For a second, the noise around us dulled. The skyline blurred behind her. I didn't look at Cole. I kept my eyes on Lauren. How long? I asked. 3 months. Her face didn't break. No guilt. No fear. Just observation. I nodded once. Okay. That was all I said. Inside, everything slowed down. Not chaos. Not anger. Just a narrowing of focus. The same way it happens when a deal collapses mid-negotiation. You don't react. You assess. Who knows? What matters? What moves next? Lauren watched me closely. Too closely. Then, suddenly, she laughed. Sharp. Bright. Familiar. Oh my God, Evan. You should see your face, she said, covering her mouth like she couldn't hold it in. Relax. It's a joke. I didn't move. Cole's an improv actor, she added, gesturing toward him. I hired him. I wanted to see how you'd react. Cole gave an awkward half-wave. Yet, sorry man. I didn't realize. Lauren was still laughing. Come on, she said. That was good. You have to admit that was good. Around us, a few people had turned. Not many, but enough. Enough to see. Enough to remember. I looked at her for a long second. Then I glanced at Cole. Then back at Lauren. I see, I said. My voice stayed even. But something settled into place inside me. Not confusion. Not hurt. Clarity. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the punchline. I felt like I was watching the setup. The laughter didn't stop right away. That was the first thing I noticed. Not Lauren's. Hers faded after a few seconds when she realized I wasn't joining in. It was the others. Low, uncertain chuckles from people who didn't fully understand what they had just witnessed, but knew it was something uncomfortable. Cole stepped back first. Yeah, I'm gonna grab another drink, he muttered, already disengaging, like he wanted distance from whatever this was becoming. Lauren was still smiling, but it had changed. Less confident now. Watching me. Measuring. Evan, she said, quieter. Come on. It was just. I know what it was, I replied. I adjusted my cuff. Small, precise movement. Grounding. Behind her, I saw 2 men I recognized from earlier. One of them, Martin Keene, was someone I'd been trying to secure a long-term contract with for months. He wasn't laughing. He was watching. Not with amusement. With calculation. That mattered. I turned slightly, enough to acknowledge him with a nod. He gave one back, slower, then looked away like he'd seen enough. That mattered more. Lauren followed my gaze, then looked back at me. It's fine, she said quickly. Everyone knows it's a joke. Do they? I asked. My voice stayed level. No edge. That seemed to unsettle her more than anger would have. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the rest of the night, I didn't leave early. That would have made it worse. I moved through the event the same way I always did, steady, composed, focused. I returned to the conversation she pulled me from and finished it without mentioning what had happened. I shook hands. I listened. I responded. But something had shifted. Every interaction now carried a second layer. People were polite, professional, but there was a hesitation I hadn't felt before. A slight delay before trust. A flicker of curiosity in their eyes, like they were trying to reconcile the version of me they knew with the scene they had just witnessed. And in my line of work, hesitation is a cost. Near the end of the evening, Martin approached me. Evan, he said, calm as ever. Interesting night. It is, I agreed. He studied me for a second. Everything stable on your end? There it was. Not a direct question. Not inappropriate, but clear. I met his gaze. Completely. He held it for a moment longer, then nodded. Good. Let's reconnect next week. Of course. He walked away. Not a loss. Not yet. But not the same. When the event finally wound down, Lauren found me near the exit. You're seriously still acting like this? She asked under her breath. Like what? Cold, she said. Distant. It was a joke, Evan. People laughed. Yes, I said. They did. We stepped into the elevator together. Silence filled the space, thick but controlled. She crossed her arms. I don't understand why you're making this such a big deal. I looked at the reflection of both of us in the mirrored wall. Perfect from a distance. Fractured up close. It's not the joke, I said. Then what is it? I turned to her. It's the timing, the audience, the intent. She scoffed, shaking her head. You're overanalyzing. No, I said quietly. I'm not. The elevator doors opened. We walked out together, but not side by side. And for the first time in 9 years, I wasn't thinking about how to fix something. I was thinking about what it had already cost me. We didn't speak on the drive home. Not because we didn't have things to say, but because anything said too early would turn into noise. Lauren stared out the window, arms still crossed, her reflection sliding across the glass every time we passed a streetlight. I kept my eyes on the road, measured, quiet, controlled. When we got inside, she dropped her heels by the door harder than usual. This is ridiculous, she said, walking past me into the kitchen. You're acting like I actually cheated on you. I took off my jacket slowly, placing it over the back of a chair. I'm not acting, I said. She let out a sharp breath, grabbing a glass, pouring wine without asking if I wanted any. It was a joke, she repeated. People do worse things for attention. At least I was honest about it immediately. I watched her for a moment. Honest? I asked. She turned, irritation flashing. Yes. I told you right away. You created the situation, I said calmly, then revealed it. That's what a joke is, Evan. No, I replied. A joke doesn't put your husband in a position where his professional credibility is questioned in real time. That hit something. I saw it in the way her posture shifted. Subtle. Defensive. Oh my God, she said, laughing once without humor. This is about your clients? Seriously? It's about context, I said. You chose the room. You chose the timing. You chose the audience. She set the glass down harder than necessary. You always do this, she said, her voice tightening. You strip everything down until it sounds worse than it is. I didn't respond. That seemed to frustrate her more. Say something, she pushed. I am, I said. You're just not listening. There was a pause. Longer this time. Then something shifted again, but differently. Not anger. Something closer to exhaustion. She leaned back against the counter, arms dropping to her sides. You know what, she said, quieter now. Fine. You want the truth. I didn't move. You've been gone for months, she continued. Not physically. But you're not here. You come home, you eat, you think about work, you go to sleep. I could disappear for 3 days and you'd probably just assume I had a project. That's not true. Isn't it? She shot back. When was the last time you actually asked me something that wasn't surface level? I held her gaze. She didn't look away. I thought we were both busy, I said. That's your answer? She asked, shaking her head. Busy. I could hear the edge breaking now. I've been trying to get a reaction out of you for months, she said. Anything. Anger. Frustration. Something real. I stayed still. And this, she gestured vaguely, like the entire night was still hanging in the air. This worked. There it was. Not pride. Not apology. Confirmation. You humiliated me, I said. I needed you to feel something, she replied immediately. I did, I said. She waited. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I felt clarity. That landed harder than anything else I could have said. Her expression changed. Small, but definite. What does that mean? She asked. It means, I said, this wasn't a mistake. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Final. You chose this, I continued. Not because it was funny. Not because it was harmless. Because you wanted control over the reaction. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't interrupt. And now you have it, I finished. For the first time that night, she didn't have a response ready. She just stood there, looking at me like she was seeing something she didn't expect. And maybe she was. Because I wasn't trying to fix this anymore. I was starting to understand it. I packed a bag that night without rushing. 2 shirts, 1 suit, laptop, charger. The essentials, nothing more. Lauren didn't try to stop me. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom, arms folded, watching like she was still trying to understand what had shifted. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Hotel," I said. "For how long?" "I don't know yet." That was the only honest answer. She nodded slowly, like she expected something else to follow. An explanation. A condition. Something emotional she could respond to. I gave her nothing. "I think we should take space," I added. Her jaw tightened slightly. "So that's it." "For now," I said. I walked past her, picked up my keys, and left. The hallway outside felt quieter than usual. Or maybe I just noticed it for the first time. The hotel room was exactly what I needed. Neutral. Clean. No history in the walls. I placed my bag by the chair, set my phone on the desk, and sat down without turning on the TV. For the first time in years, there was no background noise. Just silence. The next morning, I called an attorney. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. Just to understand the landscape. Options. Timelines. Exposure. I approached it the same way I approached any complex situation. Gather information before making a move. By the second day, the situation felt less like a shock and more like a structure. Lauren texted once. "Are you coming back?" I didn't answer immediately. Then, "We need to talk." I replied with one line. "Not yet." That evening, Nate called. I almost didn't pick up, but something about the timing felt deliberate. "Hey," he said when I answered. His voice was quieter than usual. Careful. "Hey." There was a short pause. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm managing." "Yeah," he exhaled softly. "Listen, I've been meaning to talk to you since that night." I leaned back in the chair, already sensing this wasn't casual. "About what?" I asked. Another pause. "Lauren," he said. I didn't respond right away. "What about her?" I asked. He hesitated. I could hear it. Then he said, "She talked to me. Before the event." That shifted something. "When?" I asked. "A couple weeks ago," he replied. "We ran into each other for coffee. It wasn't planned." I said nothing. "She asked me about you," he continued. "Not like small talk. She was trying to figure something out." "What exactly?" I asked. "If you seemed happy," he said. "If you talked about her. If anything felt off." The room felt even quieter. "And?" I asked. "I told her you seemed the same as always," he said. "Focused. Busy." I didn't think anything of it at the time. I stared at the wall across from me. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because after what happened at the party," he trailed off. "It didn't feel like a joke anymore." "No." "It didn't. It felt like she was trying to force something," he added. I closed my eyes briefly. Not anger. Not relief. Just a clearer picture. "She didn't tell me she was planning anything like that," he said quickly. "If I knew." "I know." I cut in. And I did. That wasn't the part that mattered. What mattered was the timing. Weeks before the party. Before the joke. Before the public setup. She had already been asking questions. Quiet ones. Careful ones. Not about leaving. About whether I had already left without saying it. "You think she was panicking?" I asked. Nate exhaled. "I think she didn't know how to ask you directly." I let that sit. Because it fit. Not as an excuse. As a pattern. "Thanks for telling me," I said. "Yeah, it just felt like you should know." We ended the call shortly after. I stayed in the same position for a while. Phone still in my hand. The narrative had changed. Not completely, but enough. This wasn't just cruelty. It was something messier. Something less controlled. And somehow that made it worse. Because now I wasn't just dealing with what she did. I was starting to see why. 3 days after Nate's call, Lauren stopped texting. No messages. No missed calls. No pressure. The silence felt intentional. On the 4th day, my attorney sent over a preliminary outline, asset division, timelines, what separation would realistically look like if it moved forward. Clean. Structured. Predictable. I read it twice. Then I closed the file. That same evening, I got an email from someone I didn't recognize. Subject line. "I owe you an apology." I opened it. It was Cole. "I didn't know what she was planning," the message started. "She told me it was a private joke between you two. Something you'd both laugh at." If I had any idea it would happen like that, in front of people who mattered to you, I wouldn't have agreed to it. I read it slowly. No defensiveness. No excuses. I've done improv work for events before, but this wasn't that. I crossed a line, even if I didn't understand it at the time. I'm sorry. I leaned back in the chair. This wasn't necessary. He didn't owe me anything. But he sent it anyway. That mattered. I replied with one sentence. Understood. Thank you for reaching out. A few minutes later, another email came in. Lauren. Not a message this time. A document. Attached. I opened it. It was a formal agreement draft. Not finalized, but structured. Fair. Balanced. No hidden advantages. No aggressive positioning. She wasn't fighting. She was preparing. Below the attachment, a single paragraph. I started therapy. Twice a week. Not to fix this quickly. Just to understand what I broke and why I chose that way to do it. I kept reading. I'm not going to defend what I did. It wasn't a joke. It was control, like you said. That line stayed with me. I'll sign whatever terms are fair. I'm not interested in dragging this out or making it worse. A pause. Then the last part. But if there's even a small part of you that believes this isn't finished, I'm asking for one thing. Not forgiveness. Not a reset. Just one honest attempt at counseling. No games. No performances. I didn't move for a long time after reading it. This wasn't the Lauren I had been dealing with. No charm. No spin. No performance. Just structure. Accountability. And something else. Restraint. She wasn't asking me to come back. She was asking me to decide. I stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city. Cars moving. Lights shifting. Everything continuing as if nothing had changed. But something had. Not in her. In the situation. For the first time since the rooftop, there was no chaos attached to her actions. No audience. No pressure. Just a quiet, controlled offer. And that made the decision harder. Because clarity is easy when one side is wrong. It becomes complicated when both sides finally start telling the truth. I didn't answer her that night. Or the next. I met with my attorney again, went through the terms in detail, adjusted what needed adjusting. Everything was still clean. Still fair. No hidden angles. If I signed, the process would be efficient. Predictable. Safe. That word stayed with me longer than it should have. A week later, I agreed to one session. Not as a decision. As data. The office was quiet. Neutral colors, soft lighting, nothing that suggested comfort or discomfort. Lauren was already there when I walked in. She didn't stand up. Didn't smile. She just nodded once. I took the chair across from her. For the first time in years, there was no performance in the room. The therapist asked simple questions. What happened? Lauren answered first. Not defensively. Not emotionally. Accurately. I created a situation to force a reaction, she said, because I didn't know how to ask for one directly. No embellishment. No humor. Just fact. I listened. When it was my turn, I didn't describe feelings. I described sequence. The issue wasn't the act, I said. It was the structure. Public setting. Professional risk. Lack of control. The therapist nodded. We continued like that. No raised voices. No interruptions. Just two people finally speaking in a language the other could understand. We didn't solve anything in that session, but we established something more important. Clarity. The second session went deeper. Patterns. Timing. The distance that built without either of us naming it. Lauren didn't avoid responsibility. I chose escalation instead of honesty, she said. I didn't soften my position. I ignored signals because they weren't presented clearly, I replied. Neither of us tried to win. That was new. Weeks turned into months. We didn't move back in together immediately. That would have been easy and wrong. Instead, we created structure. Scheduled conversations. Defined boundaries. No ambiguity. If something felt off, it was addressed directly. No interpretation. No guessing. Lauren stopped performing entirely. No jokes at my expense. No tests. No setups. And I adjusted too. Not by becoming someone else, But by removing distance, I had disguised as stability. I started asking questions I used to skip, and waiting for the answers. Slowly, something rebuilt. Not what we had before. That version relied too much on assumption. This one didn't. It was quieter, more deliberate, less comfortable, but more real. Months later, I walked back into her house. Not as a return, as a decision. Lauren was in the kitchen again, barefoot. No wine this time, just coffee. She looked at me, steady. "Are you sure?" she asked. I set my keys down. "Yes," I said. Not because everything was fixed, but because now if something broke, we would see it coming. And more importantly, we wouldn't pretend it wasn't there.